The hearing will now come to order. Good morning. Welcome to today's hearing, The Science of Security, Lessons Learned in Developing, Testing, and Operating Advanced Radiation Monitors. In the wake of the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001, preventing the detonation of a nuclear or radiological device, a dirty bomb, in the United States has become a top national security objective. We've invested billions of dollars since 9/11 to develop the means to prevent, detect, and respond to any attack by weapons of mass destruction. We've developed radiation monitors at our ports and border crossings to screen millions of cargo containers entering the United States every year, hunting for radiological material that could be used for terrorist purposes. Since 2004, the Department of Homeland Security has spent more than $230 million on a program to develop a new radiation detection system called an Advanced Spectroscopic Portal, or ASP, that can both detect and identify nuclear material. Congress expects that the funding federal agencies receive will be well spent. When it comes to scientifically challenging or technically demanding programs, it pays to have a well-prepared program requirements, demanding testing protocols, and an independent and comprehensive cost-benefit analysis. Those vital steps, those vital program components to help managers make informed decisions about whether to move forward with a technology development program or to replace a proven technology with a new technology. Unfortunately, despite recent progress, the ASP program has suffered because it lacked all of the preparatory steps of a well-managed program. We will hear about some of those problems today from the Government Accountability Office and the National Academies of Science. Over the years, the GAO has released 6 reports on the ASP program. The GAO found some of the domestic nuclear detection office's tests were biased and did not provide a rigorous assessment of ASP's capabilities. The agency relied on incomplete and unreliable data in their cost-benefit analysis, omitting critical test data, inflating the cost of current radiation detectors, and underestimating the cost of ASP monitors. The department failed to produce a requirements document or adequate documentation regarding major changes to the planned ASP deployment strategy. DNDO never considered the option of investigating improvements of the existing radiation portal monitoring program, both the PVT monitors and the handheld detectors that Customs and Border Protection agents rely upon. The National Academy of Sciences interim report on the ASP program released yesterday reflects many of the same concerns. The Academy calls for significant restructuring of DHS testing procedures for the ASP program. They question the criteria being used to judge the ASP's performance, and they recommend that DHS not proceed with further ASP procurement until they address all of the findings and recommendations in their report. GAO's reports have provided a regular accounting of how the ASP program was going wrong. The Academy report provides a roadmap to how the program can be put back on track, assuming that the department determines that it's worth the cost and effort. Radioactive materials have become a normal part of commerce. They are used for medical procurements, procedures, and industrial applications. Bananas have radiation. Technology can help us detect and identify radioactive sources in cargo containers, but no technology can sort out good radioactive material intended for legitimate purposes from the bad radioactive materials intended to do us harm. As a result, human operators will still need to make important decisions, often informed by intelligence efforts to keep the nation secure. Well-trained, well-equipped people, law enforcement officers, and Customs and Border Protection inspectors will always be critical to the equation. This hearing addresses our responsibility to the technological part of that equation. Before we move forward with a $2 or $3 billion program, we must ensure that we get our money's worth from the new technology. Put another way, if we have $2 or $3 billion to spend to enhance our security, is this technology really how we should spend it? I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses today. And now I recognize Dr. Brown, the ranking member from Georgia, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to welcome our witnesses here today and to thank you for participating in this important hearing on the Department of Homeland Security's Advanced Spectroscopic Portal Program. Well, that's hard to say, particularly for a non-scientist, but I am a scientist, so I'm a physician. Yesterday, the House took up consideration of the DHS appropriations bill, and later today, the Science Committee's Technology and Innovation Subcommittee, which I'm also a member, will hold a hearing on cybersecurity. I also sit on the Homeland Security Committee's Subcommittee on Emerging Threats, Cybersecurity, Science, and Technology as well. Needless to say, DHS has kept me busy this week. This morning, we will look into the status of the department's ongoing development of the next generation radiation portal monitors, get an update from GAO on their continuing work, and receive a report from the National Research Council. It goes without saying that this program has been followed closely for some time now. And thankfully, many of the testing issues that GAO has brought up in previous reports seem to have been mitigated, at least somewhat. However, this program is far from out of the woods. In their most recent analysis, GAO and the Academy raised new issues relating to the rigor of the testing and the certification process and offer paths forward for potential acquisition in the future. I hope DHS takes these recommendations seriously, and I look forward to ensuring that they are not summarily dismissed for the sake of arbitrary timetables. We see that frequently here in government. Looking forward, DHS should conduct a rigorous cost-benefit analysis that takes into account updated threat assessments, a review of all variations of concepts of operations, potential upgrades for existing technologies, and independent cost estimates. It also needs to weigh the pros and cons, not just of Asp versus PVT and RID, but also whether additional capability gained outweighs the needs of other aspects of the global nuclear detection architecture. Unfortunately, this may be hard to do at this point, considering GAO indicated earlier this year that the Domestic Nuclear Detection Office had, to quote GAO, quote, not developed an overarching strategic plan to guide its development of a more comprehensive global strategy for nuclear detection, unquote. All of these factors need to be taken into consideration as DHS moves toward an acquisition. Even then, I will remain cautious, given the department's track record with past acquisitions. Many of the issues we're dealing with today could have been prevented by engaging the end users early on in the process. Also by clearly defining the requirements and simply following existing department acquisition processes. Last week, this subcommittee held a hearing on issues plaguing INPOs. The Asp program exhibits eerie similarities to that program in that it attempted to link research and development activities with the acquisition of an operational system and had unclear architectural priorities. Let's hope other federal programs can learn from these lessons and protect taxpayers from future inefficiencies and waste. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time. And I look forward to our witnesses' testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I'm now pleased to introduce our first panel of witnesses. Mr. Gene Aloise is the Director of Natural Resources and Environment at the Government Accountability Office, GAO, and Dr. Micah Lowenthal is the Director of the Nuclear Security and Nuclear Facility Safety Program in the Nuclear and Radiation Studies Board at the National Research Council of the National Academy of Sciences. Is that how you describe your job at a cocktail party? As our witnesses should know, you'll each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for the hearing. When you have all completed your spoken testimony, we will begin with questions, and each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. It is the practice of the subcommittee to receive testimony under oath. Do either of you have any objection to taking an oath? Okay. You also have a right to be represented by counsel. Do any of you have counsel, either of you have counsel here? Okay. If you now please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? Okay. The record will reflect that both Mr. Aloise and Dr. Lowenthal took the oath. Mr. Aloise, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I am pleased to be here today to discuss DHS's plans to develop and test advanced portal monitors for use at the nation's borders to prevent nuclear materials from being smuggled into the United States. According to DHS, the current system of radiation detection equipment is effective and does not impede the flow of commerce. However, DHS wants to improve the capabilities of the existing equipment with new equipment. One of the major drawbacks of the new equipment is the substantially higher cost compared to the existing equipment. We estimated in September 2008 that the life cycle cost of each standard cargo version of the ASP to be about $822,000 compared to about $308,000 for the PVD standard cargo portal, and that the total program cost for DNDO's latest deployment plan would be about $2 billion. Since 2006, we have issued 6 reports, and including today, 4 testimonies, and have made 19 recommendations for improving DNDO's efforts to develop and test portal monitors. Our concerns have focused on the need for realistic and objective testing of ASPs, full disclosure and reporting of testing limitations, development of cost estimates that consider the full cost to deploy the new equipment, and development of a sound cost-benefit analysis which determines whether the marginal increase in security from the ASPs is worth its very high cost. My testimony today is based on our recent report, which assessed the most recent round of ASP testing. I will also discuss the lessons learned from ASP testing. Our work on the latest round of ASP testing found that DHS increased the rigor in comparison with previous tests and thereby added credibility to the test results. However, we still question whether the benefits of the ASP justify the high cost. In particular, DHS's criteria for a significant increase in operational effectiveness require only marginal improvement in the detection of certain weapons usable nuclear material. The marginal improvement required of ASPs is particularly notable given that DNDO has not completed efforts to enhance the performance of the current generation of equipment. CBP officials have told us that they have repeatedly urged DNDO to investigate improving the performance of the equipment through what is known as energy windowing. DNDO has collected the data necessary to do this, but has not yet completed efforts to analyze the data and further improve the technique. Our analysis of the new test results showed that ASPs detected certain nuclear materials better than PBTs when shielding approximated DOE threat guidance, which is based on light shielding. However, differences between the two systems were hard to recognize when shielding was slightly increased or decreased. Both systems had difficulty in detecting nuclear materials when shielding was somewhat greater than the threat guidance, which is set to match the extent of the detection limits of the PBTs. Importantly, the threat guidance is not a realistic approximation of how a terrorist might shield nuclear material to successfully smuggle it undetected through a border crossing. In addition, DNDO underestimated the time needed for ASP testing, which was originally supposed to be finished by September 2008. DHS's most recent schedule anticipated ASP certification around May 2009, but testing has been delayed even further, and DHS has not updated its schedule. As far as we know, certification is scheduled for sometime this fall. Of concern to us is the fact that DNDO does not plan to complete computer simulations that could provide additional insights into ASP capabilities and limitations prior to certification. On this point, DNDO does not seem to have learned from past mistakes. A rush to deploy ASPs before all testing is complete leads to shortcuts in testing and raises questions among stakeholders about the equipment's effectiveness and reliability. Furthermore, DNDO has not yet updated its cost-benefit analysis, which might show that DNDO's plan to replace existing equipment is not justified. One of the primary lessons to be learned from our work is to avoid the pitfalls in testing that stem from a rush to procure new technologies. In the case of the ASP, the push to rush to replace existing equipment led to a testing program which lacked scientific rigor. Even for the new round of testing, DNDO consistently underestimated the time necessary to conduct tests and resolve problems, and testing is still not completed. In closing, we believe that given the importance of this new equipment to our national security, the Congress and the American taxpayer still need to know three things. Does the equipment work? How much will it cost? And does the marginal increase in security justify its very high cost? Mr. Chairman, that concludes my remarks, and I would be happy to respond to any questions you or the ranking member may have.
Thank you, Mr. Aloise. Dr. Lowenthal.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Miller, Ranking Member Brown, members of the committee. My name is Micah Lowenthal. As you said, I'm the Director of the Nuclear Security and Nuclear Facility Safety Program at the National Research Council's Nuclear and Radiation Studies Board. I'm here to describe a recently issued interim report from a congressionally mandated National Research Council study on advanced spectroscopic portals. I'm the study director supporting the authoring committee of that report, and I'll begin by providing background on the request for this study, and then I'll summarize the main messages of the report. The Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, wants to deploy new radiation detector systems called Advanced Spectroscopic Portals, or ASPs, to improve screening of containerized cargo for nuclear and radiological material. The ASPs are intended to replace some or all of the radiation portal monitors and handheld radioisotope identifiers currently used at ports and border crossings across the United States. Congress required that the Secretary of Homeland Security certify that the ASPs provide a significant increase in operational effectiveness over the old systems. Congress also directed DHS to ask the National Research Council to advise the Secretary on testing, analysis, costs, and benefits of the ASPs before the certification decision. I want to point out that the appropriations committees who made these requirements said that they appreciate that certification will be difficult. Both the study committee agrees with that these are hard problems, both in the testing and the cost-benefit analysis, so it's not surprising that DHS's work has been challenging. Here now are the main findings and recommendations from the interim report. The study committee found that the ASP performance tests prior to 2008 had serious flaws. The Domestic Nuclear Detection Office, DNDO, acknowledged problems with the tests and addressed a number of those flaws in later testing. The 2008 performance tests were indeed improved, but shortcomings remain. DNDO's current approach to performance testing involves physically testing detector performance against a small number of configurations of threat objects and cargo in one environment. But the set of possible combinations of threats, cargo, and environments is so large and multidimensional that DNDO needs an analytical basis for understanding the performance of its detector systems, not just an empirical basis. Our study committee recommended that DHS use a more rigorous approach in which scientists use computer models to simulate configurations and detector performance, use physical tests to validate and refine the models, and use the models to select key new physical tests that advance our understanding of the detector systems. This iterative modeling and testing approach is standard in the development of some high-technology equipment and is essential for building scientific confidence in detector performance. The idea of an iterative approach also extends to deployment. The study committee recommends a process for incremental deployment and continuous improvement of the ASPs, with experience in the field leading to refinements in both the technologies and the operations for the next deployment. As a first step in this process, DHS should deploy the unused ASPs it already has to assess the ASP's performance in multiple environments without investing in a much larger acquisition at the outset. The ASP cost-benefit analysis was not complete when our interim report was written. Preliminary estimates by DNDO indicate that the cost increases from replacing the currently deployed systems with ASPs outweigh the cost reductions or savings from operational efficiencies. Therefore, a careful cost-benefit analysis will need to reveal the security advantages, or if any, of the ASPs over the current systems and possible alternatives. Such a cost-benefit analysis should include three key elements: a clear statement of the objectives of the program, an assessment of meaningful alternatives, and a comprehensive, credible, and transparent analysis of in-scope benefits and costs. DHS should consider trade-offs among different options for allocating its efforts and funds, looking at the overall systems for ways to improve defense against nuclear smuggling. The study committee recommended that DHS not proceed with further procurement of ASPs until it has addressed the findings and recommendations from the report, and the ASP has been shown to be a favored option in the cost-benefit analysis. Now, those are the main messages from the report. For this hearing, I was also asked to comment on any lessons learned regarding processes by which the ASPs have been researched, developed, and tested to date. Although the study committee only examined the testing of ASPs, not a broader portfolio, I think there are 3 lessons to be learned based on the study. First, the process of modeling and testing iteratively can be applied more broadly to other complex technology development programs. Second, incremental deployment with continuous improvement is a good strategy for deployment of systems that have not fully matured, especially if they're envisioned to have an ongoing mission. And third, the systems level approach, that is examining how to optimize choices within the overall system rather than focusing narrowly on one trade-off decision, is applicable to almost every use of equipment in security applications. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I would be glad to elaborate my testimony in response to questions.
Thank you, Dr. Lowenthal. Unfortunately, you all probably know that our days here are somewhat scattered, and I need to go to the floor. We have tried to arrange another member of the majority, who's a member of the subcommittee, to preside in my absence. Ms. Dalkemper has been an especially conscientious member, and she may arrive between now and 11, which is when I expect to come back. And if that's the case, we will come out of recess and she'll preside, or any other member of the majority who's a member of the subcommittee.
Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to preside if you'd like for me to.
Well, I thank Dr. Brown for that generous offer, but I think we'll do it the way that every other committee and subcommittee in Congress does it. With that, we will need to stand in recess. I apologize again for the inconvenience. Believe me, it's more inconvenient for me than it is for you. And we will be back in session. But I appreciate your being here, and I thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you.
We're back. We are now out of recess. Floor colloquies are undoubtedly one of the most peculiar, stylized aspects of congressional service. I've heard of political campaigns that 80% of all the effort is wasted. The problem is no one knows what the 20% is that's not. I suspect that there's at least that ratio of wasted effort in congressional service, and I very much suspect floor colloquies are in the wasted effort category. But it was something I had to do.
Floor debate, isn't
it? I will resist temptation to point out other aspects of congressional service that may be wasted effort. If we may now begin our rounds of questioning. Mr. Aloise, Dr. Lowenthal, Dr. Brown. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Dr. Brown raised the point that there are other priorities that we have to decide between priorities even within security. So it's not security versus other things government does. In October of 2007, this committee held a hearing on a exercise on a scenario of a terrorist attack, assuming that a dirty bomb was detonated in 2 American cities. And what we found was that we were probably better prepared, certainly better prepared for Katrina than we were for dirty bomb attack, despite the fact that if there is one punch that has obviously been telegraphed by terrorists, by Al-Qaeda in particular, it is a dirty bomb attack. We did not have the capacity to conduct the tests to see what the level of contamination was, to let our people know that they can go back into offices, office buildings, that we might shut down indefinitely 10, 15, 20 square blocks of an American city, the midtown of an American city, or perhaps two. It would probably take 6 years to complete the necessary environmental tests for an attack in one city, nor testing on individuals to see if they had been exposed to radiation. That might take a couple of years. We would have to tell parents that we could not test their children to see if they had been exposed to radiation for a couple of years. But if the child's hair started falling out, call us and maybe we can move them up in line. And the failing there seemed to be simply one of funding, not prepared to respond to a radiological attack. And here we see we're spending $2 or $3 billion to develop a technology that those who will use it really question whether it does much of any good at all, certainly not enough to justify $2 or $3 billion. DNDO expects the Secretary of Homeland Security to make a decision this October, 4 months from now, about whether to certify that it is worth investing the $2 billion in the ASPs. Do either of you believe that there will be enough information available this fall for DHS to make that decision, and how confident are you that the cost of the ASPs justify the investment? Mr. Aloise?
I'll go first. Well, that is the question. In our view, until integration testing is done, field validation is done, operational testing is done, the injection studies are complete, an analysis of energy windowing versus the ASPs is done, till all the testing is done, and we know whether or not this marginal increase in security is justified through a sound, independent cost-benefit analysis, it's our belief we shouldn't spend any money on this program or go forward with it.
And do you think there's any realistic chance those preconditions may be satisfied between now and October?
At this point, it does not look that way.
Dr. Lowenthal?
We agree that these are the preconditions for going ahead with certification, that there's a great deal of information that's needed. I'm not really in a position to tell you how much time it will take them to get that information together. There is some information that they presumably have already put together, some analysis that they've already done that we haven't seen. We will be happy to look at it when they provide it. But in terms of timelines, we would not be inclined to guess it when they'll be ready.
Both of you appear to disagree with DHS's view that they will be able to obtain the data they need from field evaluation tests that are to begin next month. Why do you not believe that those tests will be good enough to make to base a DHS decision on? Mr. Aloise?
Well, that's only part of, as I just said, what they need to base their decision on. Field validation testing has not gone well so far. They suspended it after 2 weeks because they were actually sending more. The ASPs were actually sending more to secondary than the PVTs. So they had to work out a number of those problems, and I'm assuming they have. It's been a while since the initial testing. We just have to see how it goes, and we're going to be looking to CBP for a lot of the answers because they're the agency that has to live with this equipment. And we feel fairly confident they're not going to go forward until they're satisfied that the testing is going right at this point.
Dr. Lowenthal?
The testing that they're going to do for field validation is going to tell them something that they need to know, but it won't tell them everything that they need to know. And the study committee's recommendations were to enhance what they're going to be able to learn from these sorts of tests with modeling and simulations. The range of environments that they're going to be operating in is very limited. They're only doing field validation testing in 4 different sites. And there are a lot of other conditions, a lot of other kinds of cargo and so on that are worth learning about. Some of that can be done with simulation, and some of it can be done with the deployment that the committee recommended.
Thank you. My time has expired. Dr. Brown for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. How would y'all is a Southern word, how would y'all prioritize the upgrade from the PVT RID system to the ASP system within the entire global nuclear detection architecture? Start with Dr. Lowenthal.
I should point out that the committee really only looked at the testing of the ASPs and talked about what kinds of information a decision maker would want to have. And so the committee recommended that they consider these other components of the global architecture, and there are gaps that are known and have been pointed out by others within that architecture. But the committee did not study that question itself. What the committee did say is that if you look at this from the perspective of an adversary who's trying to sneak something into the United States, if you reinforce the places where you already are screening, but you leave other avenues totally open, you may not be gaining much improvement in security.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Eloise.
We agree. As I mentioned to Dr. Lowenthal a minute ago, we're spending a lot of money upgrading locks on the front door, but the windows in the back door are wide open. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense to do with limited resources?
I agree wholeheartedly. Are there other areas that would benefit greater from the same level of investment, Mr. Eloise?
Well, there are a lot of vulnerabilities that need to be looked at that have not been properly addressed in the architecture. The border crossing is really not the greatest threat. So we believe that we should be looking at equally hard all the other vulnerabilities in the architecture, because as it was just said, that's probably not where they're going to come through. If they've taken the time and trouble to get this material, it's unlikely they're going to stick it in a cargo container and drive it across through a portal monitor.
And with an open borders, they can just carry it in wherever they want to carry it. So, Dr. Lowenthal, particularly, let me ask you to answer your question in view of a comment you made in your testimony about that we have ASPs sitting there now. If you would include that discussion. Well,
given the scope of our study, I wouldn't be comfortable to try to identify what the most promising area is. What the committee recommended is that DHS do that analysis, look at the entire system. We have some concerns that hasn't been done, and I'll separate this into 2 parts. One is that the committee recommended that DHS look at that whole system in addition to just the trade-off between the ASPs and the PVTs, because as a decision maker, the people in the administration and in Congress will want to know whether their money is well spent. The analysis does not appear to have been done elsewhere, and so the committee recommends that it be included in this ASP decision. Now, the other component of that is the deployment of the ones that they already own. That's more for a learning exercise. This is something where they can learn more about the performance of the systems in the field and improve them as they go forward. I think these are directed at slightly different points.
Thank you. My time disappeared, so I guess I'm out of time. I'm not sure where we stand, but thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You'll have time for a second round, because I was planning to ask at least one more question. So now I recognize myself for a second round of questions. Your criticism, for both of you, the criticism appears to be as much that the problems with the ASPs was not the technical challenges, but that the whole program was just poorly managed. This is a recurring theme for this committee. You know, how could programs be managed better? both you think that the whole testing program has been troubled from the start, and that the management more than anything else is a problem. What lessons should we learn? How should this program be managed differently? How can it be managed differently in the future? This and other similar programs.
Well, I'll take a shot at that. Back in 2006, when we issued our first report on the deployment of PVTs, we learned about the ASPs. And we knew then that there would only be a marginal improvement in security. That's why we called for a cost-benefit analysis before anything went further. Is it worth the marginal increase in security you're going to get from the ASPs? Do that first. Then go talk to the Congress, and then decision makers can decide whether it's worth it or not. And we know the story. It was poorly done, and it was based on assumptions, not data. And that leads us to where we are today. And it was a rush to push technology through that was immature. And that has got to be the true lesson of this, is that without proper and scientifically rigorous testing, without a technology that is mature, it should not be generally rushed to deployment, especially when you have a system already there that's working.
Right. Dr. Lowenthal.
I should point out that our study committee was silent on the matter of whether this was managed well or not. But I think that the report highlights many of the points that you made in your opening remarks about what should be done in the future. I think you hit on all of those. A well-planned out testing program with criteria established in advance, and an idea as you go in for what you're going to learn from each stage of this, making sure that it matches up with what the customer is looking for, as Mr. Aloise mentioned. All of those components lead to having a testing and evaluation program that will lead to a procurement that gives the customer what he needs and the nation what it needs.
Would it be a fair summary to say that the problem is that we began with the conclusion and then found the analysis to support it, rather than beginning with the analysis and then finding what conclusions would come from the analysis?
I think so, Mr. Chairman. I think we had a solution in search of a problem.
Okay. There is a problem, but there may have been another solution. You're reaching for your button, Dr. Lowenthal. Okay. Our clock is not working, so each member needs to show some self-restraint. I'll now go to Dr. Brown for a second round. Ms. Dalkemper has arrived and I think is now collecting herself. Dr. Brown for 5 minutes, however that might be measured. 5 minutes based on an honor system.
I hope Ms. Dalkemper can collect herself. I trust that she can. She's very good at doing that. I'm very interested to hear Dr. Lowenthal's comments about whether we can take the ASP units that are available now, put them in a parallel screening process out there in the field, as the appropriators evidently are preventing us from doing. Would you recommend that we do so, and is that something that you could put in your report to us so that we can look at that possibility and maybe even make that recommendation?
Yes, our study committee recommended that they take they procured a number of these on low-rate initial production so that they could test and evaluate them. And they have a number of them that have been sitting mothballed. I understand that some of them have been cannibalized for parts for other ones, and we don't have an exact number of how many they have. But they have some number of them that they already own that they could deploy in the field. Our study committee's recommendation explicitly in the report is that these should be deployed at selected sites, and the experience gained from those will contribute to both their understanding of how they perform, but also how they might be able to modify the operations at the sites, and also the technology, what improvements they might want to put in there. So that is explicitly in the report.
Mr. Eloise, any comments?
Just that we would agree with that. We think that's a smart idea.
Thank you. I hope that the CBP people can be consulted, because I think the end user has not been consulted enough in this process. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you. You may or may not have had time to yield back. You probably did. Ms. Dowkemper for more or less 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I apologize for being late. I had a markup in another committee, but I appreciate the opportunity to ask a question of both of you, if you could just address this. Can either of you provide some insight into whether improving portal radiation detection is worth $2 to $3 billion? Assuming that ASPs prove to be robust enough to use and they deliver a real improvement in detection and commercial flow, would that still be enough to justify deploying them, given all the other needs out there and our limited resources?
Well, I have to go back to, and I know I sound like a broken record on this, a cost-benefit analysis that we've been calling for a couple of years. All of those factors that you mentioned need to be in there so that decision makers can look at it and see whether this marginal improvement is worth it, considering all the vulnerabilities we have in the architecture already that we need to address.
Dr. Lowenthal?
We agree entirely that a cost-benefit analysis will be needed to show that. We are not in a position to judge whether they are going to be worth it, partly because our study didn't examine the results of their tests for this interim report. It looked at the approach. Once they have the results and they can factor those into their cost-benefit analysis, then a judgment can be made as to whether they are worth it.
Mr. Aloise, the GOA has done a lot of work on how agencies should do a cost-benefit analysis. Can you lay out some principles that should be guiding DHS as they begin their own cost-benefit analysis on whether to acquire ASPs or not?
Yes, in fact, we just developed this about a year ago on how to develop a cost-benefit analysis. It was based on working with 90 representatives from all the federal agencies, including DHS, and it lays out exactly what the best practices are. But some of the things must be based on fact, must be fact-based, based on data, not assumptions, must have proper documentation all along the way. And those are kinds of things that we're missing from the ones we looked at for DNDO.
Anything specific to this particular?
In particular, test results. What do the test results show?
Okay. All right. Dr. Lowenthal, do you want to comment on that?
If I can just add one point, we give some advice on how to complete the cost-benefit analysis, but one of the things that is pointed out in our report is that no cost-benefit analysis at the end that deals with security matters is going to be totally unassailable, that they're going to have to produce something that they can defend, but you're always going to be able to pick at some part of it. This is a difficult problem. This is not an easy issue to work through.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Dowkemper. You still had 5 minutes. That concludes the questioning of this first panel. Again, we thank both Mr. Aloise and Dr. Lowenthal, and we'll stand at ease for a second while this panel can step down and the next panel can come up. Thank you. At this time, I would like to introduce our second panel. Dr. William Hagan is the Acting Deputy Director of the Domestic Nuclear Detection Office at the Department of Homeland Security. That's also a mouthful of a title. Mr. Todd C. Owen is the Acting Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Office of Field Operations at the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Department of Homeland Security. You will each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record. When we have completed your spoken testimony, we will begin with questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. It is the practice of the subcommittee to receive testimony under oath. Do either of you have any objection to taking an oath? Both witnesses indicated that they did not. If not, you also have the right to be represented by counsel. Do either of you have counsel here? And both indicated that they did not have counsel present. Please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? Okay. The record should reflect that both witnesses took the oath. We'll begin with Dr. Hagan.
Good morning, Chairman Miller, Ranking Member Brown, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. As Acting Deputy Director of the Domestic Nuclear Detection Office, DNDO, at the Department of Homeland Security, I am honored to be here with my colleague from U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Mr. Todd Owen. I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to share lessons learned and progress to date on our Advanced Spectroscopic Portal program. I would also like to thank the committee for its support of DNDO's mission to reduce the risk of radiological and nuclear terrorism to the nation. Over the past 3 years, we have made substantial investments in the development of the next generation radiation portal monitor, known as the Advanced Spectroscopic Portal, or ASP. The goal of the ASP program is to advance passive detection for cargo inspection. ASP is expected to automatically discriminate threat from non-threat materials for unshielded to lightly shielded threats in primary inspection, while improving identification capability in secondary inspection. To ensure that ASP systems achieve the necessary technical and operational performance, we are in the midst of putting them through a rigorous test campaign. ASP has already advanced through several rounds of performance testing and will face field validation at ports of entry, as well as independent operational testing and evaluation conducted by the DHS Science and Technology Directorate's Operational Test Authority. The successful completion of these tests, along with other analyses and consultation with the National Academy of Sciences, will then inform the Secretary's certification decision for ASP this fall. In addition, during the execution of our test campaigns, we have cooperated with the Government Accountability Office and the National Academy of Sciences to provide both groups with information and visibility into our testing and analysis processes. The resulting reviews issued by the GAO and the NAS provide a valuable external assessment of the ASP program. The 2008 through 2009 set of ongoing tests reflect a number of steps DNDO has taken to reform test processes. For example, one of our most fundamental improvements has been to standardize test event planning. We now utilize detailed instructions with a 6-milestone process to ensure that test planning is done openly, that partner inputs are included, and that test events are designed to provide the data required to meet the objectives of the test and to help make programmatic decisions. Additionally, some improvements in the ASP program have been the result of DHS-wide enhancements to program management. The changes put in place within DHS further ensure that any eventual certification or acquisition decisions are consistent with DHS priorities and made with a strong acquisition management foundation. Specifically, we are implementing DHS's new Management Directive 102-01 for large acquisition programs, which requires a complete set of analysis, testing, and documentation as input for an acquisition decision. This set includes, for example, analysis of alternatives, concept of operations, operational requirements, mission needs statements, cost-benefit analysis, and others. We are acutely aware that we must integrate end-user requirements and conduct test and evaluation campaigns. We recognize that the development and deployment of new systems can be expensive, and the cost to taxpayers must be justified by the increased capabilities of the equipment. We feel that the plans and procedures now in place for the ASP program provide a sound foundation for future certification and acquisition decisions. ASP systems have been under review and evaluation for over 3 years, and further improvements will always be possible. but I believe that after the plan testing and analysis is complete and the requirements of MD 102-01 have been fulfilled, DHS will be in a position to make an informed decision. As a final note, I would like to emphasize that while we are diligently working to characterize and evaluate the performance of ASP to ensure that operators receive appropriate equipment for their mission, the ASP program is only one piece of the multi-layered solution we call the Global Nuclear Detection Architecture, through which we seek to integrate efforts across the government into an overarching strategy to improve the nation's nuclear detection capabilities. Accordingly, we plan to continue deployments of detection systems at our official ports of entry while also dedicating increased time and effort to a wider range of pathways. In addition, we have been working to strengthen the architecture by filling gaps, improving technologies, building necessary infrastructure, and raising awareness about radiological and nuclear threats and the role of detection systems. I look forward to continuing to work with our partners within DHS, other federal departments, and state and local agencies, and the members of this subcommittee and the Congress to help keep the nation safe from radiological and nuclear terrorism. This concludes my statement. I thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Hagan. Mr. Owen for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Miller, Ranking Member Brown, distinguished members of the subcommittee. As the Acting Deputy Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Field Operations with U.S. Customs and Border Protection, I'm honored to be here this morning alongside Dr. Hagan to discuss the detection of radioactive and nuclear material in cargo containers and the future role that advanced spectroscopic portal technology will have on CBP operations. I'd also like to express my gratitude to the Congress for its continued support of CBP initiatives. Among the numerous priorities that were recognized in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, Congress provided CBP with $100 million worth of stimulus funding towards non-intrusive inspection equipment. This funding will allow CBP to upgrade and expand its successful NII program and more efficiently inspect containers and vehicles crossing the border, allowing them to enter our country and its commerce in a safe and prompt manner. CBP has made tremendous progress in ensuring that supply chains importing goods into the United States are more secure against potential exploitation by terrorist groups aimed to deliver weapons of mass effect. CBP uses a multi-layered approach to ensure the integrity of supply chains from point of stuffing through the arrival in the U.S. ports of entry. This multi-layered defense is built upon interrelated initiatives, which include the 24-hour Act in the Trade Rule, the 24-hour Rule in the Trade Act of 2002, the automated targeting system, the use of non-intrusive inspection equipment and radiation portal monitors, our Container Security Initiative, and the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism program. These complementary layers enhance security and protect our nation. Prior to 9/11, not a single radiation portal monitor and only 64 large-scale, non-intrusive inspection systems were deployed to our nation's borders. By October of 2002, CBP had deployed the first RPM at the Ambassador Bridge in Detroit. Today, CBP has well over 1,200 RPMs and 227 large-scale NII technology to systems deployed nationwide. NII technology allows the officers to detect possible anomalies which may indicate the presence of a weapon of mass effect or some other contraband. And to date, in fiscal year 2009, CBP NII systems have conducted over 3.1 million exams, resulting in over 7,800 narcotic seizures, with a total weight of over 2.6 million pounds, as well as 6.2 million in currency seized. In addition to the significant strides made in the area of NII equipment, CBP also continues to deploy first-generation radiation portal monitors to our ports of entry. Currently, 97% of the trucks and 93% of the personally owned vehicles arriving from Canada, 100% of the trucks and vehicles from Mexico, and 98% of the arriving sea containers are scanned by our current radiation detection technologies. In total, CBP scans 98% of all cargo arriving into the U.S. by land and sea using radiation portal monitors. In addition, CBP officers scan 100% of general aviation aircraft arriving to the U.S. from foreign destinations using handheld radiation identification devices. Since the first RPM was deployed in 2002, CBP officers have scanned over 368 million conveyances for the presence of radiation, and we have resolved 2.1 million radiological alarms successfully with minimal or no impact to the flow of legitimate trade and travel. CBP continues to closely coordinate with key stakeholders to ensure the impact of this activity causes minimal disruption to port operations. The first-generation RPM systems, although very sensitive, do have limitations. While they alert CBP officers to the presence of radiation, a secondary exam is necessary to positively identify the specific isotope causing the alert. In the event that a CBP officer is unable to positively resolve the alert, scientific reachback is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The Asp is expected to enhance our detection capability while significantly reducing the number of secondary examinations. This is due to its ability to distinguish between actual threats and natural or medical radiation sources that are not security threats. CBP has worked closely with the DNDO in the development and operational testing of Asp, has provided DNDO with functional requirements, and has been actively engaged in every step of the evaluation process. CBP's focus for operational testing is to evaluate the effectiveness for systems deployed in our operational environments. We will continue to work with DNDO and the DHS Science and Technology Directorate towards secretarial certification, and we are also working within DHS to ensure that any future ASP acquisitions and deployment decisions are consistent with DHS priorities. The decision to purchase and deploy ASPs in the operational arena will be based on CBP's mission needs, operational requirements, comprehensive cost-benefit analysis to include the full understanding of maintenance and operation costs, and analysis alternatives and other considerations. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, today I have addressed CBP's commitment to investing in new technologies and emerging technology aimed at enhancing cargo security. We must continue to maintain our tactical edge by integrating new technology into our ports of entry. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here this morning, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Dr. Hagan, you've heard a lot of criticisms of this program this morning, that it's the Maginot Line of terrorism. It's pretty unlikely that terrorists will actually try to go through the system when it would be relatively easy to go around it. That a lot of the testing seems to be an afterthought to justify a conclusion that was already reached. The end user, the Customs and Border Patrol, think that they are doing perfectly well, and that their existing technology could be improved upon relatively cheaply compared to the investment that would be required, the spending that would be required for ASP. And both of the previous witnesses very much questioned the validity, the thoroughness of the testing that was being used to justify the decision to deploy ASP. What is the urgency, and in view of all of that, what is the urgency about putting a certification decision before the DHS Secretary in October?
I guess there's a couple things I'd like to say. First is that there is a sense of urgency regarding some of the limitations of the current system. We can't talk about these in open session, but we'd be happy to do that at a later time. But having said that, I don't believe that today that there is a rush to deployment, nor is there a do it by October or something bad happens. So what we are doing though is pushing forward as aggressively as we can to get to the decision point about deployment. In other words, we're not saying we've got to deploy these right now. We're saying we've got to get as soon as possible to the point where we make that decision. And as was said by the earlier witnesses, the information that's required to make that decision, as I mentioned in my oral statement, there's a lot of information, a lot of data, a lot of test results that have yet to be analyzed and brought together and integrated in this cost-benefit analysis. And that will be an important part of the decision that will be made in October. So I guess I would disagree that we are rushing to deployment. I would say that we're rushing more towards getting all the information as fast as we can, but doing it in a thoughtful, deliberate, disciplined way, and through this MD 102-01 process that I mentioned, to get to that decision point.
Okay, Mr. Owen, we heard again from GAO and National Academies of Science that the work to this point did not really instill confidence in them that this new system would perform as reliably, as effectively as we would like, or even as the existing technology works. They seem not concerned about a delay. They in fact encouraged a delay. Do you agree with their recommendation to stick with what we got and not rush either to deploy or to certify or to decide to deploy?
Well, sir, as the operator, the end user of the systems, we, as frontline officers, need technology that will not only reduce the possibility of a missed threat, but as well as reduce the rate of innocent alarms that our officers are spending their time on. In the Port of Long Beach, for example, we have between 400 and 600 radiation alarms every single day. We have a team of about 100 officers over the 3 shifts that work on just resolving these innocent alarms throughout the course of their workday. So having a new piece of technology or an enhancement to technology that will allow us to not only identify any missed potential threats, but reduce the number of innocent alarms is something that we do support. But as I mentioned in our hearing in testimony, we have been doing this for some time with the existing PVTs. We've been able to resolve those 2.1 million alarms without a negative throughput with the flow of commerce in our ports of entry. So the technology that we have is effective, but again, as we have matured the technology, we are looking for that technology which will give us an edge, if you will, a step up from what we have, particularly in terms to missing any threats that the PVTs may not capture right now.
With respect to the existing technology, the PVTs with the follow-up
Yes, sir.
searches, are there enhancements, improvements in that technology that seem available, achievable, and have those improvements, are those being pursued?
Our current system with the PVT, which will alert, the container will then go into secondary where we will perform the analysis with the radiation isotope identifier, and we push that information back to our laboratory and scientific folks. It's a process that we have crafted and we feel comfortable with. What we have seen in the operational area in terms of the energy windowing that you heard from the first panel is we have seen operational benefits to being able to make adjustments to the existing PVTs to account for the recurring, burdensome, naturally occurring radioactive shipments that come through in legitimate cargo. So we have seen the benefits from energy windowing in the operational environment. Now, as to have we pushed those benefits as far as we can through energy windowing, we really need to defer to the scientists, to DNDO and our partners at Pacific Northwest National Laboratories to tell us if we have gone as far as we can with energy windowing. But again, as the operator of these systems, we've seen benefits in the ports of entry where we have deployed energy windowing. Have we maximized that? I'd really defer to the scientists to give us that answer.
I understand the principal problem with the current technology is, as you've pointed out, not so much that would miss. It's less a concern for missing radiation than the large number of false positives. Perhaps not false in the sense that it's not radiation, but that it's not radiation that's a problem. How I understand that the PVT system has been tested for that as well. How did it fare compared to the the AST system? How did it fare compared to the PVT system in false positives?
Yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah.
The actual test data is classified,
Okay.
but I can answer in a qualitative way that there are 2 places in which the ASP is being tested and considered. One is in primary inspection, and the other is secondary inspection. Do you want me to explain what I mean by that?
Well, for the record, at least, sure.
Okay.
Briefly.
Yeah. So a conveyance comes in and goes through primary inspection or screening and goes through an RPM or radiation portal monitor of some sort. If that monitor alarms, then that conveyance is referred to secondary inspection, where it is further examined either with another monitor or a radiation portal monitor or a handheld or RID. And ASP is being considered for deployments to both of those, both primary inspection and secondary inspection. In the primary application, the ASP has the ability to identify the type of the source of the radiation. PVT is not able to do that. So PVT simply says there's radiation, you better go to secondary, and off it goes. In the case of ASP, because of the spectroscopic nature of the system, it can discriminate between a threat material and non-threat material, or if it can't discriminate, then it sends it to secondary as well. So it can dismiss and reduce the number of referrals to secondary. In the secondary application, if you have ASP there, then you're comparing essentially the performance of a large spectroscopic portal, which is very, very large, compared to a very small handheld detector. In which case, again, I can't talk about the specifics of the results, but the ASP is far superior to the handheld detector in terms of its ability to, in real time, identify the source of the radiation and dismiss it as appropriate.
Okay, well, just, is it classified to say which did better, the PVT?
Oh, no,
or
I'm
the
sorry.
ASP?
I'm sorry. I should have said yes. So the ASP does far better in the secondary application of being able to identify
Well, I'm sorry, which system produced more false positives, ASP or PVT?
In the most recent
February.
Yeah, okay. In the most you're talking about field validation testing,
Yes.
I think. In field validation tests, the ASP system sent more had more referrals to secondary than the PVT did. However, we have now, it's actually not surprising. It was the first time that ASP had been able to operate in a real operating environment. And so just as with PVT, adjustments were made to what are called thresholds in the ASP. So we're not making software changes. We're simply tuning the system as you do with the PVT. And then we've done a lot of analysis and simulation, as was mentioned earlier, to verify that these changes will, in fact, improve the performance and give us the expected performance.
Okay, it appears that my time has really and truly expired. Dr. Brown for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't watch the clock very closely, as you very well know, and I'll always almost always give you a lot of leeway unless there's some particular reason not to. But back to Dr. Hagan, what you were just saying, it's my understanding that the ASPs, you just made a statement that they're better, but it's my understanding that that's only with the lightly shielded radiation. Isn't it true that with heavily shielded or moderately shielded radiation that there's not much difference between the two programs? And is it also not true that that if anybody's going to be bringing radiation types, special nuclear materials in any shipment, aren't they going to be shielded and very highly so?
Answer the second part first. One might speculate that would be the case, but you can't really know for sure. And so, so yes, it's probably likely that someone would shield it, but a knowledgeable adversary might not do that for other reasons, which I'll talk about later. But going back to the first part of your question, yes, the two systems, both PVT monitors and ASP monitors, are what are called passive detection systems. They both suffer from the limitation that if a nuclear material or a weapon is shielded enough, then there just is no signal for either detector to detect. Now, what we are the long-range plan for this, and it's already being implemented in part, is to say that by having these passive detectors, we are forcing the adversary, knowledgeable adversary anyway, to heavily shield the object. Well, that heavily shielded object then is a very, well, I shouldn't say very, but is an easy target or an easy image or easy thing to identify in a radiographic image or non-intrusive inspection system, which Mr. Owen talked about. So by having complementary or in a sense orthogonal type of systems, one that's passive system that will detect lightly shielded or unshielded material and another system that will detect shielded material, then you've done a good job of covering the complete spectrum of possibilities. Any system of course, can be defeated by a knowledgeable adversary, but by having those two systems combined, then you really do a much better job of dealing with that problem. That being said, the amount of shielding that's needed, the effectiveness of PVT versus ASP for lightly or moderately shielded materials depends on what it is you're shielding. And we'd have to go into particulars and specifics about different types of objects, which we can't do here.
All right, thank you, Dr. Hagan. My time's about up. I'll yield back.
Ms. Dalkemper for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I live on Lake Erie, and so I go back and forth to Canada a fair amount. And actually, I felt much safer after a few years ago when we were pulled over because my father had had a stress test 2 weeks prior. So I do actually have some personal experience with those innocent alarms. I didn't understand what was going on at the time. First time I'd ever been pulled over.
I hope it didn't cause too much stress.
No, we were fine. But I actually felt much better coming back home and telling people who had no idea that this was actually being detected as we all would drive back home from Canada. But DHS has spent almost $1 billion deploying PVT monitors at border crossings and ports across the country, including the one I came across, obviously. Does Mr. Owen, the Customs and Border Protection, believe that the current system, using PVTs and doing the secondary inspection with handheld detectors and other means, is working well in terms of keeping us safe and moving commerce along? And I guess I'm wondering, what is the cost of manpower versus what is the cost of ASP? I'm looking at the dollars spent here, knowing we have limited resources, and where are we best spending our money?
And I would just respond, ma'am, again, two parts to that equation is the PVT finding all of the threats, or are there threats that could be slipping through just because of the physics involved, and that's where ASP can help us in that regard. The second piece of that would be, can we respond to the number of secondaries that are caused by the existing PVT systems? And the answer is yes. We demonstrate that. There is a resource impact on this. Again, we look at Los Angeles. If we look at what we do up in the Peace Bridge there in Buffalo, where you probably came through, it is a timely process. The officers do have to go through each secondary exam and treat it as if it is a real threat. We cannot let our guard down and just assume it was your father-in-law that he had medical testing, let you go down. We have to take you out of the vehicle. We have to go through that whole process. So having a system that reduces the number of innocent alarms that are sent into secondary will help us do that. As to is the cost of the manpower savings offset by the ASP, I think that is some of the work that the DNDO is doing with their overall cost-benefit analysis. It will take into consideration those variables.
I wanted to ask you, too, about the maintenance and operation costs of ASPs, and they're estimated to be anywhere from 5 to 12 times more expensive than the cost of running the PVTs. And so the worst case ASPs will cost about $100,000 a year to run as compared to $8,000 a year for the PVTs. Does Customs have the budget to support this kind of system if it were deployed nationally? And have you thought about what you would have to give up in terms of personnel or other, equipment to run this?
Yes, and that's a very good question. That is a concern that we do have now. The ASP systems, depending on how the final outcome of the cost benefit and the cost of the systems, I think it's well accepted that it's going to cost more than what we have with the PVTs. Currently, we have about 1,250 PVTs deployed nationwide. We continue to expand along the northern border. We're going to get up to 100% of the cargo coming in from Canada this year will be covered by PVTs. We'll end up with about 1,500 PVTs by the end of this calendar year. There is an extensive operation and maintenance tail that comes with that. I think any deployment decisions going forward with ASPs needs to be cognizant of the impact that will have on the operator. There's much talk about the initial acquisition cost and the deployment cost to buy it, put it in the ground, but I don't think we can forget about the operation and maintenance tail that comes along with this that will then fall on the backs of the operator, in this case CBP. So it is something that we are concerned with. It is something that, again, is going into the overall cost adjustments for what we can expect with the ASP systems.
And so do you have any thoughts on what this would do in terms of personnel? Would it free up great numbers for other purposes?
Well, my view on this is when you look at the way the layouts are in the seaports, you have to have still an officer man those exit gates where you have the radiation portal monitors. So whether it's manned with 2 officers or 1 officer, because the alarms are less frequent, there'll still be a cost figure associated with the manpower. There may be some operational adjustments that we can make in the secondary areas, but I think the cost savings are something that we still need to measure once we are confident that the ASPs are delivering as we hope they will do. So there will be some savings from that. Will that offset the increase in operation maintenance costs associated with the ASP? That's something that we have to take very care consideration of.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Owen. My time is up. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Dalkemper. That will be the last round of questions. Dr. Hagan, I trust that when DHS has completed its cost-benefit analysis, that we will get a copy that is still warm from the printer.
Okay.
And so under the rules, before we bring the hearing to a close, I do want to thank all of our witnesses for testifying before the subcommittee today. Under the rules of the committee, the record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from the members and for answers to any follow-up questions any member of the committee may have for witnesses, and I understand that Dr. Brown does have questions. The witnesses are excused, and the hearing is now adjourned.